Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, and I am continuing my build of the Estes Super Vega. It is time to start working on the balsa. So the balsa here is actually a pretty nice balsa. It's in pretty good shape. It is die cut, which is not how Estes does things anymore. They laser cut pretty much anything that they make. So if you're not used to it, there are definitely some little irritations. There's a reason that nobody die cuts stuff anymore, and we'll see that shortly. But first off, we need sanding block. We need to sand down this sheet of wood. It's a little ragged. That's not, it just happens from time to time that you get a piece of balsa that's a little bit more ragged than your average piece. And that's exactly why the first step here is to sand some of that off. As a reminder, of course, this is not going to get the wood smooth, at least not perfectly smooth. That probably will never happen, honestly, but it is the first step. And again, in this step, it's not even really all that smooth to the touch. You just don't want any obvious, like over here, it is still pretty rough. I can feel grain pretty badly. But here I don't care because this is not actually a piece that I'm going to cut out. Here is where the fin ends, and it's fine. So I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm going to sand. I can only do about half of it at a time, or at least I'm choosing to do about half of it at a time. And then, of course, I need to flip it to sand the other side. It wouldn't do to get half, but not all. You be careful too. Maybe you can see the bottom part of this where the one cut is starting to separate from the main sheet of balsa. If it snaps, it's not the end of the world. In fact, probably not bad at all. But try to keep it together. See how we did. Yeah, that's pretty good. The one thing about die cut is that it tends to stay together a little bit better than laser cut fins because the laser cutting burns basically through the whole piece of wood, and the way it stays together is there's a little burr that is not cut, purposely not cut, and that's the only thing keeping the whole thing together. The die cut system doesn't work like that. It cuts most of the way through. So the whole thing tends to stay together a little bit better. Usually. That's not bad. All right, last little bit of sanding. And then it'll be time to cut things out. I already cut out the first sheet. There are 2 sheets of balsa. So I already did the first sheet. And it went pretty well. It is time consuming, more time consuming than using laser cut sheets. And you will probably see why if you are not familiar with this process. Let's see how we did. That's not bad. Of course, I am going to take plenty of time later on to really work on getting that smooth enough so that it'll have a good finish. But for the time being, it's good enough. All right. Now, the difficult part, if there is a difficult part, about dealing with this kind of die cut material is it's hard to see where you're supposed to be cutting out. Laser cut, well, cuts by using a laser. It burns the wood, right? So you can see there's like char marks everywhere where the laser went. The die cutting doesn't do that. So you can probably see some of the lines. One of the downsides to standing first is it actually makes it harder to see the lines. So it's not the world's worst idea to go over the lines before you start sanding the sheet, which I actually did. Makes them a little bit easier to see. Again, this is cut most of the way through, unlike with laser cutting. So The goal here, at least, is I'm going to kind of just trace along the cuts with my blade. Some of them, like that one, if they tend to be with the seam, or with the grain rather, they oftentimes just fall right apart. The ones that are directly across the seam like this against the grain, they tend to be harder to cut. So, like the first time I'm just tracing, right, and separating the wood just a little bit, I'm not really pushing. I just want that to exaggerate the cut that's already in there. So take your time. Take more than one pass at each of these bits. And again, the goal is to just use the knife to split apart the existing cuts wherever they happen to be. Also do yourself a favor and cut away from the fin when you've got multiple pieces coming together, like here. Also, sometimes it is helpful to use other, like multiple sides, the other side of the balsa sheet to get things separated. What you don't want to do is force anything, because when you start forcing things, that's when you get some ugliness. All right, so there's one piece. The thing that tends to happen with this more than anything else is you get kind of ratty points. So that's not great. Yeah, you can see against my finger, it's not as tight a point as you could get. Now we're going to sand that down, so it shouldn't be as large of an issue, but we've got 3 of these now, and you can see they're all of varying degrees of, they're not super great. But we'll get that, and we'll fix that eventually. All right. There are 3 big fins in this, and yeah. So if you feel resistance, then you should probably just trace it a couple more times. Don't try to force anything here, because as mentioned, that's when things start to get ugly. All right. All right, I'm going to flip this over because this last bit down here didn't really feel like it had separated on the other side. All right, good. The other thing too is these have notches out of them. The little tubes that I cut out in the previous, or I didn't cut out, that I traced in the other video, they're going to go in here. And again, these are kind of hard to see. One thing you can do is, if you're really having a hard time with it, you know generally where it is. You can kind of like flex the wood, not to try to snap it free or anything, but if you flex the wood, you can see where the die cutting was a little bit, because there's a crack there. And again, I am going to flip it over to work on the other side here. Yeah, this one is, oh, well, it's pretty loose. Let's go gentle. There we go. All right, there's a big fin. 3 of these now. And these are actually going to have to be, they're composites, so that's not all of it. All right. The rest of this, again, yeah, it's kind of hard to see. There are 3 fins here. They're not actually separate fins. They're 3 triangle pieces that I am going to use to complete the big fin. This is a really large fin. There we go. So But actually, seems like a good place to take this out. There's little trapezoidal fins that are going to be little canards at the front end of this as well. So by the time everything is done, they're going to be, I think, 3 separate fin types. So we got there's a trapezoidal fin. We got a set of them. There's going to be a set of those triangular ones. And then there's going to be this composite fin that I have to figure out at some point. And let's cut the rest of the trapezoids out, I think. Again, if you can't tell where the blade's supposed to go, that's the real drawback to die cutting. Just give it a little flex. Or you might have it, if you sand it at first, you might have sand, dust in there, sawdust. There we go. So I got my trapezoidal ones. Again, they are not perfectly matched, but we'll deal with that. And then this is the triangular fin that's going to be the composite element for the big fins, I believe anyway, that we just cut out. So they are largely detached. And these, I didn't actually cut this, but I mean, it's supposed to come apart like that. I will just run the blade through here in case it's caught on the other side, which it could be. And I'm going to go in the other direction too to try to keep the cuts as clean as possible. Actually, I guess these are the ones that go in the composite part right down here. Yeah. So they're going to go together like that. These are, I guess, freestanding. Well, interesting. All right, one left. There's little fragments falling off here. Okay. Hopefully this will be the last cut. There we go. All right. By the way, this is some of the longest balsa sheet that I've seen in a while, so I'm actually going to restock my gluing stick supply here, so I'm going to cut a little bit of this off. Usually you get a little bit of scrap balsa that you could purpose for sticks and whatever, but this is particularly long. I mean, this is a fairly long balsa scrap, so I'm actually going to keep that. Yeah, that one's a little thicker than I need, so good enough. It's nice to restock the supply. Okay, so everything's cut out. That went reasonably well. No particular casualties. The last thing that I'm going to do here quickly is, here's a piece of sandpaper. I'm going to line these guys up, and I think these anyway are identical on all the sides. And I'm going to just sand them all down so they're hopefully the same size. Usually doing this with laser cut stuff, more than anything, I'm trying to take burrs off and get rid of some of the char. But in this case, I actually need to do this to make sure they are all roughly the same size. So you do want the pieces to be the same. All right, so I'm going to repeat the process. These guys, the little tip out here that is kind of ratty, hopefully sanding that, I might as well do it. Hopefully sanding will clean some of that up, but I suspect that it probably will not do a thorough job, in which case you might need to break out your hobby knife again and just kind of trim to make them uniform, which looks like it's going to need a little bit of that. So I'll show you that quickly. It usually only affects the really narrow tips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line them all up, and I'm going to break out my hobby knife. I'm just going to chop through the end here. So that got, it's not completely straight, but that's not a big deal. If it's not completely straight, I could trim this again, because it looks like the white one on the left is a little bit longer than the ones on the right. It's pretty good. So that's one way to trim things up. All right, so I am going to sand the other ones down on my own time, and then next video hopefully will be a little bit of fin construction. So thanks for watching. I'll see you then.